Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the ChinWag. It's very nice to have your company this morning on the 29th of July 2022. Where's the month gone? It seems to have just whizzed past. Maybe it has dragged for you. I hope it hasn't. We are going into this cost of living crisis by the sounds of things in a huge speed. And I was wondering today, this might be a bit contentious and a bit stupid, possibly. And I would appreciate your reasoning on this. It seems that the fuel companies are making huge profits by charging extremely high prices for the fuel that we are consuming and will be consuming in order to get through the winter, at a time when supplies are supposedly restricted and difficult to get hold of because of things like the war in Ukraine. And these companies are making big profits, and they're charging a hell of a lot, and they seem to have more money than they know what to do with. And yet the people who they serve, i.e. you and me, who are trying to use the fuel just to get by, are paying through the nose. And I don't understand. In the old days, people would lower the prices if they were making a large amount of profits because they didn't need to charge quite so much. And they could lower the prices to keep as many customers on as they could, and to save customers going elsewhere. I guess the problem is that customers have nowhere to go, and so these companies can continue to make big profits by charging higher and higher tariffs. And if that's the case, there must be something wrong. Now, I have a wood-burning stove in my kitchen. It's an Essie Ironheart. I bought it about 5 years ago with some inheritance money from my father. I was very lucky to be able to buy this thing. Prior to that, many years ago, about 20 years prior to that, I had a Rayburn, which was about third hand and had been salvaged from someone's garden that it had been dumped in for about a year. And when I moved into this house, in fact, it was probably 30 years ago, in actual fact, my wife and I at the time were offered this thing that nobody wanted, that was pretty much on its last legs. And we thought it would be lovely because we had a coal bunker at the side of the house 30 years ago. There was still a coal bunker in the early 1990s. I think we moved in 1991. And there was still a coal bunker with some coal in it. And it's a brick-built Victorian terrace built in 1871, something like that, the house that I'm in. And it's still standing, thank you. So we got this thing. God knows how we got it back. I can't remember. This old Rayburn, very simple thing. You know, you say to somebody, oh, I've got a Rayburn or an Arga, and they think, oh, well, you've got to be rich, haven't you, to operate one of those things. As I say, this was like third-hand rusty in someone's garden. We got it in, I plumbed it in myself. In those days, there wasn't YouTube videos to watch how to do things. You had to sort of get books out the library and work out how the hell do I do a bit of plumbing. Anyway, I managed to do it, got it working, and we ran it for about 2 years until it actually collapsed and was no good. And we used the coal, and we had more coal delivered. And yes, it was a bit filthy, and it wasn't, but it worked, and it was very easy. And occasionally, you could stick other bits and bobs into the firebox if you wanted to. I now have, as I say, a wood-burning version of the same sort of thing. The thing about having a wood-burning version of it, having a fuel box in which you can put bits of wood in and you can cook, you can heat the water, I can heat the house and also use that to dry my clothes, gives me a certain democratic feel that even though I have to buy wood, I can, and I do occasionally, collect perhaps the odd pallet, or am offered a bit of a tree that somebody else has cut down, or have found a log, on the side of a road and thought, actually, nobody's wanting that. I can shove that in my van. I can cut that up and I can burn it. There's a sort of democratic feel that I don't have to go to the big six, the big corporate fuel companies to have my fuel, which, when I look at my neighbours who have electricity and gas for cooking and heating and drying and things like that, they have to. Now, obviously, I'm running the studio with electricity because that's how life is. So I do still have to get some of my electricity or some of my power, shall we say, from the big six or from one of the small satellite companies that's all feeded into the same big corporate conglomerations. But for quite a huge chunk of the bill that I would ordinarily have to have paid for, and in the past for a while did pay for heating and cooking, I no longer. I go to my local woodman and he supplies me with logs, and if he was unable to supply me, I would go to another local supplier. And if as I say, I can be offered bits of wood from other people, somebody who's cut down a tree, and I can store it in the back garden, and then when it's seasoned, I can put it into the wood-burning stove, and it fuels me. It gives me a sense of democracy in a way that I am not forced. It gives me that almost free will. If I wanted to, I could chop up the furniture if I was desperate and burn that to keep warm and to cook on. But most people now can't do that. They can't just go, do you know what, I'm going to use my own natural resources and burn those so I can cook the kids a meal tonight or keep warm. We can all huddle round the fire. And people can't do that when they're relying on the big six or the big corporate fuel people. I think that's wrong, that we've now given away the ability to have a little bit more independence when it comes to heating our house and cooking our dinners. And if you go back a few hundred years and back to whenever in the past, people could gather wood, cook their meals, sit round the fire, bit like a campfire, and eat in a very orderly and simple and democratic way. You go and need a bit more wood, there's a tree bough that's come down there, we'll hack a bit off, stuff it on the fire. It seemed a very simplistic and very easy way of life, and in a way I think we've missed a lot by handing over a great chunk of how society runs into these faceless corporations that will provide us with the power. But we have to have the power they give us, and we have to pay according to their tariffs. And there's something, I think, about the human condition that finds that although that's easy for a while, we don't have to go and chop a tree down and store it and then hack it up into various bits and then light it just so that we can boil a kettle. And yet, when it goes wrong or the prices are wrong, we are stuffed in that direction. And although I hadn't set out to have a wood-burning stove so that I was freer from the next man, to me, there's something very primeval and satisfying about having to go into the garden, chopping up some kindling, cleaning out the firebox, stacking it up again, lighting that fire, getting the fire going that I have created out of the locally sourced material so that I can boil my kettle, cook a meal, heat the house, and dry my clothes, etc., and keep warm, and if necessary, light the kitchen through the firebox of the Essie. There's something it makes it within my grasp to keep myself going, rather than relying on corporations. So I'm just asking, and this may not be the answer, of course, because people's houses are not built this way anymore, But shouldn't we go back to more primitive methods of heating and cooking, or at least being allowed in our gardens if the big corporations can no longer supply us with the promise of cheap fuel, that we are able to go into our gardens, those who've got gardens and or fireplaces, and cook, break up the furniture if necessary, or an old tree or a pallet or bits of waste paper or products that no longer need, and incinerate those in order to heat our homes and get through a crisis. Shouldn't we be able to do that? And what is preventing us to do that, if anything? Or are we being pushed by many people who say, oh, we've got to save the planet, so nobody's allowed to burn anything anymore, regardless of the fact that everything is actually being burnt and the CO2 is going up into the atmosphere? And you may not agree on this, you may disagree with that. I mean, personally, I think CO2 is a good thing. We need it to grow crops. But there you are. Anyway, that's my question of the day. Should we be able to go back to a more primitive way of heating our homes and cooking our dinner? I was sitting on a campsite with the lovely Julia the other day. And if ever you've gone camping and you see people either with a fire pit or one of these portable fire, I suppose a portable fire pit, these sort of circular little fire holders so that you're not actually putting the fire on the ground. And you see people on holiday in a campsite cooking, they look very happy, and their little tents or their caravans or their mobile homes. And as we were watching them, I thought, do you know what? This is just like going back to Neolithic times. People may not be under canvas or in tin boxes, but they were in wooden and thatch and wattle and daub. Pretty much the same thing, relaxing, cooking around a fire, singing songs, playing ball games, hurtling sticks. Nothing had changed. In that campsite, it was like being back in the Neolithic times, or the Saxon times, or those pre-industrial times, other than the fact that you may be sitting in a motorized home. But effectively, that's what you were. You were sitting there in a community of people, and everybody seemed very happy, very relaxed, very content. And they were sitting around the fire, keeping warm and cooking their food. And I thought, this is something that we would be stupid to throw away and let corporations do for us. There's something very human and very community about gathering together in a much more simplistic life. So I'd be interested in your comments on that. Let's have a look at the comments that have come in since yesterday. And we'll start here with Ware in Sussex, who says, I think you're worrying too much about kids being told things. Well, maybe I am. My kids and those of my friends certainly aren't being lectured about climate change any more than I was at school 35 years ago. Well, that may be true, but what your kids are being told may not be the same, and your friends' kids may not be the same as other kids who are being told all this stuff, because you see them as we did see in all sorts of climate change protests and things, coming on the media and sitting around and taking time off school to be all concerned and worried about this. So you may be lucky that your kids are not being lectured to in that way. But also, how do you know? How do you know what your kids are being lectured? It's so prevalent these days that I think we don't even see it because it's in front of our eyes so much. It's so there that we no longer see it. It's that thing about not seeing the wood for the trees. As it was says, sorry, Richard, much as I love to agree with you, I can't. Oh, sorry, much as I'd love to argue with you, I can't, because I totally and completely agree with you. Thank you very much. What a nice man you are. And obviously a man of sense. Tony Bones says, "Hi, Richard. Regarding your mention of electric cars, they're not certainly something I'd consider getting. And what gets me later on down the line is how on earth will they be sold on the second-hand market as a used car? How knackered is the battery going to be, etc.?" Yes, the battery is the most important part, isn't it? That you need to have reserviced and stuff. Excuse me whilst I blow the hoot. I've still got a bit of cold. And it, of course, stick a camera on you, and that's when it's going to come out. The whole idea is bonkers. Is a bonkers concept. What about the manufacturing process for the batteries themselves? The infrastructure of how everyone who wishes to drive can own their own car and charge one, especially what do you do if you live in a flat, especially a high-rise flat, etc. And then the impact of the power stations, the extra output for more energy. Yes, I totally agree with you, Tony. I think the whole idea is completely bonkers. Bring back hydrogen cars. Or even there was, at the turn of the century, not this century, last century, steam vehicles. That could be quite jolly, could it not? 3P's Afterlife Contact says the blame for us. They blame us for the disasters and stuff, but it's not us that's plundering it for the oils and other resources. Imagining sucking out all the fluid from an orange. What's left on the orange? Well, that's a very good point. I tend to eat the whole orange except the peel. Jean Lima says, will we see the lovely Joe in the next video? You will in a video coming up. I'm going to be out doing some more camping with Joe very soon, actually. So in a couple of weeks, we should see lovely Joe and see how he's doing. His diction now, although it was slow to begin with, getting the diction, and you could argue, and I don't know whether it is the case, he is one of the generation of the mask babies, you know, the COVID, where people were wearing masks, and the very informative times when you should have your mouth expressing love, affection, smiles, and of course the process of making the sounds with your mouth, and a child is looking to its mother and parents. If you've been wearing masks and one of those masks, or at school or at playgroup or in society, of course that's been hidden away. And I know that researchers have been worried that there is a delay in many kids from talking from that. But anyway, we'll see that Joe is doing leaps and bounds. So very exciting. Edward Moulding says there are no filters on information for children today. There is a right time when children become aware of types of news. Yes, and these days, of course, they're being given phones, which in and of themselves you might think was a good idea. You don't want your child to wander off, and you want to be able to contact him, make sure you know where they are, etc. And you could probably put a little tracker in there to just in case something ever happens, because people get extremely worried. Never happened when I was a kid. My mum was quite happy for me to sort of just disappear for the day and be out from underneath her apron strings, so to speak. However, if you give a child a phone, you're not just giving them a telephone communication system. You're giving them a mini computer that will connect them to all sorts of dodgy old things in the world. And children have yet, at the age they are, and even some adults at the age we are not yet really savvy enough to understand how that freedom to search whatever you want at any time, and to not only understand how to do the searching and be selective, but also to be able to digest and assimilate the knowledge that they've suddenly got, whether it's a load of old rubbish, whether they shouldn't trust it or could trust it. I mean, the things that I think that kids should be taught at school more than anything else is not so much the facts, but the ways to understand what they're seeing. Because what might seem like a fact often isn't. And I think common sense, and I said this yesterday, needs to be taught across the board to the next generation, that if you can give people a grounding in common sense, so that instead of just taking what somebody says as verbatim or as true, and then thinking, well, just because this person says it, it must be true, that I think you're better off giving children a good grounding in a lot of common sense. So they may come to their own conclusions about certain things that may be wrong, but I would rather a child worked something out and it was wrong, but they had the logic to come to that conclusion so that later on they can change their mind, rather than just accepting what somebody says as fact and then being rigid with it. That's what I would rather see. I think if you are aware that you're making the decisions and coming to conclusions, you know that you can change your mind. But often I think people are given stuff and you say, this is true. Global warming is a fact. Man-made global warming is a fact. It's undisputable and there is no movement in that whatsoever, and never believe anybody that says there is. And that may not be true. And I don't think it is true. You can respect someone's thoughts for that. But I would rather that kids had the common sense to go, well, do I think that? Do I agree with that? Maybe, yes, that's perhaps 80%. Yeah, it could be. But there's still I'm allowing a 20% questioning. I think that would be far better for children these days. William Burgess says, I quite agree with you, Richard, but I think the greatest worry for younger generation would be the loss of their cell phones and perhaps to have to indulge in conversation with other people if they were able to speak or even care about other people. Well, yes, I mean, obviously the loss of their phones. And what was interesting sitting in the campsite, going back to Neolithic times, because when you sit in a campsite, it is as if you've just taken away the modern civilization. You've got rid of television, you've got rid of mobile phones, pretty much. You've got rid of a lot of the technology. You're not really listening to the news anymore. You're sitting there in a more primeval way with the elements, with nature, as we were doing, listening to the birds, watching the doves, the pigeons rather, who were flying and just seemed to be joy. And kids were just on swings and roundabouts. They were throwing sticks. They were kicking balls. They were cycling about. They had no care in the world. And I said to Julia, I said, look at these kids. They're doing this for a week's holiday, and then they'll go back and they'll be here. And the joy they had, I mean, perhaps the first day was, I can't get a signal. Oh, I'm going to hate this. But you just know, and we could see from these kids, they were having a whale of a time like kids are supposed to do. And they're not connected to the rest of that. They're just connected to the people around them, the different age groups, the grannies and the younger babies. And they have an appreciation of people of different ages, not just, I should be wearing that. My hair should be like this. I should be eating this. I've got to be that shape. And I haven't transitioned today. Shouldn't have any of that. That's the beauty of going camping. And if you haven't done it for a long time, you just don't need very much. Go camping and meet the world. It's just a joy. Absolutely is such a joy. North Lincolnshire countryman says, Richard, I now live in the North Lincolnshire due to my dad changing his job with local councils. He says, I will stop rambling. It's all right, you're not rambling. I was born in Evesham in Worcestershire. One of my distant relatives wrote books that were based in Worcestershire about farming in the 1930s. He's called Fred Archer, and they're great. Have a read. And I looked them up, actually, and there he is, Fred Archer, and I bought one of his books, and it's hopefully coming in a few days. So I will read it and let you know. I love reading old books, and I love the fact that old books are cheaper. And mostly written in a world prior to all this digital and this social media world that we're in. It's in a time when people seem to have a lot more life, I think, an understanding of real life, not pseudo-digital life. Anyway, there we go. Thanks very much. Many more comments. Please keep them coming. It's fascinating to see what you think, how you agree or disagree with the thoughts that I come up with, and it's a lovely little community. So very much enjoying making these. There will not be one tomorrow, and I apologise in advance. There's a few things going on, so I won't have a chance to do it, I'm afraid. But thank you very much for watching this, and I'll be back as soon as I can. Take care and have a great weekend. Till next time, bye-bye.